Welcome back to Collective Practice. I'm Lauren Spaulding, and if you're new here, this is a podcast for mental health entrepreneurs where we talk business skills, clinical skills, and mental health. And welcome to today's episode where we're going to be talking about boundaries and your private practice policies. Now, boundaries are something that is not only required in our field, but so necessary in order for us to create a successful business. If our boundaries are too rigid or too porous, we are going to find that we're often bumping into walls as we try to expand our services, grow our business, or fill up our calendar. And it's so important for us to have our boundaries clearly stated in our paperwork so that any incoming client knows what to expect with your private practice and with you as their therapist. And as your practice expands, if a part of that expansion is having more people on your team, these clear boundaries can easily grow with your practice because you've already established that your practice thrives on healthy boundaries, and other people are going to want to join in on that, whether it's new clients or new therapists joining the team. So let's take a moment and walk through the different types of boundaries that you want to be considering as you build your private practice paperwork and the policies that you want to place. Now, the first one is physical boundaries, and this refers to personal space and physical touch. Now, we've got some clear ethical boundaries around this as an LPC, LMFT, social worker, etc., where we have ethical codes stating we should not engage in inappropriate physical touch with our clients. However, we want to be thinking beyond that when we're thinking about how physical touch is pieced into our therapy. For example, we might have porous physical boundaries that look like saying, I'm a hugger, and hugging a client, and even though you see them hesitating or you know that physical touch is not something that they're keen on. We want to make sure that we and our staff are able to adjust our behaviors in a way that we are respecting our clients' personal space and personal boundaries. Additionally, as a leader, you want to make sure that you are checking in on this for yourself in how you are treating anyone who is staffed with you, whether they're contractors or employees. You want to make sure that physical boundaries are being clearly respected within the community that you created. Physical space is also something to be considered with office space. When you have shared offices, when people are renting one particular room, how are you making sure that people's personal space and personal items are being respected in the office? So when you have people renting from you or working from you and utilizing the office space, you want to make sure that personal space boundaries are clearly stated in contracts or policies or in some place where people understand expectations around respecting everyone's items, whether that's therapy supplies, lunches and coffees, whether that's respecting that someone is paying for that office so you can't use it without asking them. All of that is going to be so important for people coming in and feeling valued and respected when they work with you. Now let's talk about intellectual boundaries. Intellectual boundaries refer to thoughts and ideas and how those are respected and validated when people are sharing their thoughts and ideas. Now, one way that intellectual boundaries can show up in your practice would be through how staff is communicating with each other and how you're communicating with people that are working under you. We always want to consider power dynamics when we are the business owner. And if we try to neglect those or pretend they're not there, we could be causing undue harm to those who are staffed by us. So you want to make sure that you're aware of how you're asking for information and how you are receiving information and feedback from your team. Another way this could show up where you could accidentally be violating intellectual boundaries is by taking staff ideas or asking for them to give in-depth feedback and ideas on practice policies and not paying them for their time. It's one thing to have a suggestion box or a time for suggestions in staff meetings. It's a whole other thing to have someone sit in an hour-long meeting with you where they're helping you to improve a practice policy and you're not paying them for their time. You want to make sure that if you are consulting with anyone, regardless of their position or role in the practice, that you are showing them that you value the intellectual property that they're sharing with you, their own ideas and their own concepts, and that you are ensuring that they feel valued when they share that with you. Now, how this could look in the therapy room would be invalidating someone's ideas, opinions, or values. Everyone is entitled to their own intellectual boundaries, and those should not be invalidated. As therapists, we are called to an ethical standard where we are not bringing our own belief system into the room, and therefore we are not invalidating someone's ideas or opinions as they are working towards a mental health goal. Now, some aspects of these intellectual boundaries also tie into emotional boundaries, which refers to a person's feelings, and those can feel violated when the emotions are invalidated or taken advantage of. Now, I have seen this translate into business ownership, where emotional boundaries are constantly violated in a way that people that work there no longer feel safe to share experiences. And this could look like someone giving you feedback on a policy and you respond so emotionally that it's no longer about their needs and they now feel pressure to care for your emotions. That is you not factoring in power dynamics of you being the business owner. You should be able to be in enough self-energy to be open to their feedback and to pour your emotions into someone that's more appropriate, like a colleague that's at your same level, maybe another private practice owner, or a loved one like your spouse or your best friend, or even your therapist or your own person that you're consulting with. You want people who work with you to feel like they have ownership on what they share with you and what they don't share with you. And the way that you create a safe place for sharing is by respecting those emotional boundaries and not pushing them. Another way emotional boundaries could be violated would be by criticizing those that work with you. That when they give feedback, when they have suggestions, when they have opinions, you are immediately getting defensive and defending your own decisions, which in turn feels like a criticism to the person who was originally giving the feedback. Then we have sexual boundaries, which refers, of course, to aspects of sexuality, but not only physical, but also emotional and intellectual aspects of sexuality. Now, the obvious boundary, don't sleep with anyone that's working with you, don't sleep with any of your clients, and make sure you're really establishing that with anyone that's working with you, that you have a standard of them not sleeping with their clients or not violating these sexual boundaries in any way. But let's talk about the emotional and intellectual aspect of this boundary. Now, this mostly shows up in the therapy room. As therapists, you want to ensure that you and any of your staff are respecting sexual boundaries for clients, meaning you're not pushing them to try sexual acts with their loved one before they're ready. If they feel unsafe in their relationship, the solution is not for them to then be incredibly vulnerable and violate their own boundary and the reasons that they're feeling unsafe to do that with their partner. We also want to make sure that we're not imposing our own beliefs and ideas around healthy sexuality, and that we are respecting that healthy sexuality looks different for everyone. We always need to be mindful of the power dynamic that we hold in the therapeutic relationship, and we want to make sure that we're never taking advantage of that by moving towards advice giving or trying to shift someone's beliefs when it's not actually helpful for their treatment plan. As a business owner, you want to make sure that you have clearly stated sexual boundaries. You want those HR paperwork saying what the expectations are around how staff treats each other and respects each other, and what the consequences are if someone were to violate someone's sexual boundaries. This is not something that business owners in our field often think about, whereas bigger companies always have sexual harassment and sexual assault policies to ensure that everyone is safe if that ever were to happen. Just because we are in the mental health field doesn't mean that we are immune to this, and we should be ensuring that all staff feel safe around what happens if someone were to violate their sexual boundaries. And let's go even further than just sexual harassment. What about people who have different sexual orientations and sexual preferences? Are you ensuring that everyone on staff feels safe regardless of their own identity? Sexual boundaries are not just about sexual touch and sexual comments, but they are also about sexual identity and making sure that any identity and any person with any sexual orientation feels safe, feels respected, and feels cared for in the community of therapists that you have created. And that doesn't always mean you have to create a like-minded staff, because having a like-minded staff can sometimes lead to the biases you're trying to avoid. You want to make sure you have diversity in voices, experiences, and identity. And the way to do that is to make sure that your policies are allowing to create an estuary. An estuary is a place in nature where freshwater fish and saltwater fish can exist together. There's enough salt in this place where freshwater and saltwater meet that there are fish that can go in and live in that space, regardless of if they're freshwater or saltwater. And sometimes fish can be in that space long enough that they can change and adapt to a new environment. So some freshwater fish can become saltwater fish, and some saltwater fish can become freshwater fish. There's no forcing it. There's no expectation of it. It is just nature's way of creating that safe space for these different types of fish. And we should be pursuing that as we create better communities of therapists in our field, that we don't all have to be exactly like-minded, have the exact same beliefs and the exact same ideas of mental health, but instead that we can come together in a way that is respectful, that is safe, that is supportive, that is open, and that is curious. Sometimes when business owners are attempting to create an estuary, they kind of stop it at compassion. As long as we're compassionate, we're okay. And what we're not thinking about is sometimes compassion can fall into violating that emotional and intellectual boundary category, where compassion turns into things like toxic positivity or emotional exploitation. So as you're thinking about sexual boundaries, don't tune out because you're not a sex therapist or you know not to sleep with your clients. There's more involved in those boundaries to ensure that staff and clients feel safe coming into this space. Let's also think about paperwork for clients. When they're filling out their intake paperwork, are you only giving options like male, female, other, heterosexual, homosexual, other, or are you being respectful of the identities that are coming into your space that ensures that everyone feels comfortable getting therapy from you or from others in that practice? Material boundaries refers to money and possessions. And here are some ways we want to consider material boundaries in our private practice. First, we want to consider our sliding scale policies. How are we clearly stating our sliding scale, and are we doing it in a way that is fair to all of our clients? If we don't have any type of sliding scale boundaries, we might have someone who is unintentionally taking advantage of that sliding scale rate, removing the opportunity for someone else to take sliding scale, even when their own income increases or their financial situation changes. We also risk feeling taken advantage of by our clients and therefore resenting them. When we give them a sliding scale spot, we have no boundaries in place around it. They have it indefinitely, and then you know that their financial situation has changed, but they're still paying you a very small amount for your services. Having appropriate sliding scale boundaries ensures that you and your clients are able to have a beneficial experience and something that feels mutually beneficial. It's also ensuring that your sliding scale spots can consistently be available rather than coveted by only a certain number of clients who have to wait until they graduate in order to open up that spot again. Another money boundary to consider is your rate itself. Are you valuing yourself enough that others that work with you feel like they can value themselves as well? There are work environments where the private practice owner is still charging a lower amount for therapy than what they maybe should be charging at their level. So anyone under them, like an associate or someone who's been practicing for less amount of time, feels like they cannot increase their rates. You can't go over the business owner, even if that business owner is communicating, oh, you get to set your own rates. We're denying that power dynamic of anyone working with you is going to feel weird exceeding your rate. Make sure that you're still empowering those that work with you to set their own rates based on their own values and their own thoughts, and not feeling pressure from you to stay at a certain cap so that they don't undermine you or undermine the private practice. And lastly, we've just got to say it, material boundaries can feel violated when staff feels like they're underpaid. When people don't feel like they're valued in what they're bringing home for the work that they're doing, they're likely not going to stick around, and you're going to experience turnover that you were hoping not to experience. That means your policies were not clearly stated and expectations were not clear. And a lot of times, too many times, that is happening around pay structures. It's really hard for someone to work their entire career feeling undervalued, especially when they see other people who are opening private practices, working in other group spaces that do feel valued, that do feel that they are getting paid their worth, and that do feel like there's growth and opportunity, and they're not stuck in their current position. And the last boundary we're going to talk about today is time boundaries, and this refers to how we use our time. I do have a whole other episode from a while back where I do talk about how to check in on your time boundaries. But for this video, I will say that time boundaries can feel violated when we feel like a person or a facet of our life is requiring too much of our time and we're not experiencing balance. So one way to have good time boundaries in your practice is to make sure you're checking in on those working for you, and if they feel like their work-life balance actually does feel balanced. If it doesn't, can you help them audit what they want to focus on in their practice? Do they need to work towards raising rates, picking up more clients, having a different income stream? Do they need to work towards moving the times that they see clients? Whatever that might be, can you as a business owner collaborate with them to ensure that they don't feel like their time boundaries are being violated at your practice? And of course, you need to model that yourself. As a business owner, what do your time boundaries look like? Do those working for you often see you in your office late at night, always being the last one to leave? Do they see you coming in on your days off and not respecting your own time boundaries? That's going to create this expectation of, well, should I be working that hard? Should I be staying here even when I'm not seeing clients or have anything to work on? It's going to create a dynamic that's unintentional that everyone should be overworking. Time boundaries in our sessions can look like starting and ending sessions on time, having clear time expectations for your clients. Like if they're late to their session, you're not necessarily going to keep them late. They lose time by not starting on time. This is ensuring that you're respecting every single client and every person who's taking time out of their day to meet with you. Are you showing up on time to your sessions? If not, what can you adjust in your schedule so that you are? Are you ending on time so that you're not going over where another client is waiting and now your whole day has to roll into that? Are you making enough time for the tasks we have outside of those 50-minute sessions, like notes, referrals, contacting their PCP or their psychiatrist? Are you creating time boundaries where that is doable and clients are not feeling neglected in those aspects of their care? Now, these are just a few ideas around these categories. Maybe you thought of other ways that you can respect or violate these boundaries. And if that's the case, make sure to take a moment and write it down. Brainstorm these different categories of boundaries: physical, intellectual, emotional, sexual, material, and time boundaries, and just take a moment to audit yourself. See, how are you doing with these boundaries? How are you respecting them for yourself, for those that are working with you on staff? How are you respecting them for your clients? How are you potentially violating them or setting yourself up at risk to violate them in the future? And how can you make sure these boundaries all lean into the healthy category? Now, I do have a lesson on this in the Collective Practice membership, where we don't only talk about these boundaries, but I actually talk about how you can make sure this is all clearly stated in your paperwork in a way that feels respectful, value-based, and how you can make sure you're setting up a great realistic expectation for anyone working with you in your private practice. So be sure to check that out if that's something you're interested in. If you feel like you struggle with your boundaries or you need some help with your paperwork, I am so happy to be able to support you in that because I want to make sure that every therapist is setting themselves up for success. And that's everything I've got for you today. So be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. It's free and it's the easiest way to support this podcast and help it reach even more people. And share today's episode with a friend, a colleague, or anyone who could benefit from this information. Be sure to follow me on my other social media accounts where I post even more free content for mental health entrepreneurs and private practice owners. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.